Hi there guys, got a video here for you today on the BRK Ghost, and what we're going to be doing in this video is troubleshooting a little problem that I have with the rifle. Now the rifle itself shoots absolutely beautifully, although over a little bit of time the power has dropped a bit. So when I set the rifle up, it was set at about 11.5 foot-pounds with JSB heavies, and after a little test over the chronograph, the power has dropped to around 10.9. So what I thought we'd do in this particular video is just go through the process of checking different things to adjust the power of the rifle. Now the BRK Ghost isn't like most rifles in that it doesn't have a dedicated hammer spring adjuster. The power is pretty much set from the factory, although you do have a small amount of adjustment within the regulator itself. If we look at the regulator on the side of the rifle, you can see that this one is set just under the 80 bar mark. Now this is a little lower than I set it before, and it does look to me like the regulator pressure may have settled a little lower than we set it. To adjust the regulator, luckily it's nice and easy, so what I like to use is this little BRK spanner with a flat bladed screwdriver bit in the end. This allows us to get in the regulator there and adjust it nice and easily. So on the front of the rifle, you can see this is the regulator, and then the brass set screw in the middle is the adjuster screw. To increase reg pressure, we need to wind this out. So if we look on the gauge here, we're just under the 80 bar mark, and I'm going to take that up to just the 90 bar mark. So that's set at 90 bar. What we'll do now is a few dry fires into a nice safe backstop to double check that the regulator doesn't reset. And after a few dry fires, if we take a look at the regulator, you can see it's set just under the 90 bar mark. So what I'll do is I'll tweak it up just a tad bit more. And with that done, what I'll do now is just put it over the chronograph. Right then, and after a little bit of chronoing, I'm happy to say that the power has increased very slightly. With this particular rifle, we started out at around 680 feet per second with JSB heavies. After adjusting the regulator, we've bumped that up to just over 700. I did 10 shots over the chronograph and the average was 701. We may be able to increase reg pressure slightly, maybe to 100, to get us the feet per second we're looking for. However, when I set this rifle before, I set it at 90 bar. That's where I found the rifle to be most accurate and most efficient, so we're going to be leaving the reg pressure at 90. There are some other areas that we're going to have a look at, so we'll do them next. The first thing we're going to do is remove the barrel and check the transfer port O-ring, the O-ring back here. To do that, what we're going to do is cock the rifle, remove our single shot loader, put that over to one side, and then we can remove the barrel by removing this grub screw in the back using a 3mm Allen key. With that done, we can pull the barrel out the front of the rifle. And then our breech seal is located in the end of the barrel, so just in this section here. To remove it, what I'm going to be using is a sharp pointy thing, so this part here. It's a little difficult to see with the camera in the way, but we're going to be piercing the side of the O-ring, levering it out, being nice and careful not to damage the inside of the barrel. And then once the O-ring has been picked out of its seat, we can just come through with a small set of tweezers and pull the O-ring out from the back. So there we have it. The O-ring itself doesn't look too bad, although it's a nice easy thing to change, so we're just going to swap it for a brand new one. These O-rings are 4.3mm ID, 1.5mm cross section, and you can pick them up from most O-ring suppliers. So we'll take our new O-ring, add a small amount of silicone grease just to the outside of the O-ring. Just a small amount will do us. We don't want tons on the breech seal, otherwise it will just end up in the barrel. So just a small amount will do us. Then we can get that fitted into the end. To fit it into the end, what I like to do is pinch the O-ring nice and carefully like so, hook it into its seat. Then what I like to do is use our sharp pointy thing, but the smooth side of the sharp pointy thing, just to get it pushed into the seat. like so. Then we can come back with a cotton bud or a Q-tip and just get that pushed into where it needs to be. Then double check that it's in the seat, which I'm happy with there. Whilst the barrel's out of the rifle, I would also recommend removing your shroud and then giving the barrel a good clean. I've already done that off camera just to save us a little bit of time. But once we're happy, we can push the barrel back into its housing. And then with the barrel pushed all the way home, we can make sure the dimple inside of the barrel is lined up with the grub screw hole in the side of the block, and then install our grub screw. The reason that we've changed the breech seal in the barrel is that if the breech seal has failed, what will happen is air will be able to leak back around the pellet probe, and this can cause us some inconsistencies as well as a lower power level, as less air will be pushing the pellet forward through the barrel. I change my breech seals fairly regularly, probably every 2,000 or so pellets, and I've not really had any issues with breech seals leaking, but it's a nice easy thing to change, so we changed it here. The next thing we can do is put the rifle back over the chronograph and see if the power has changed. Right then, and after another 10 shots over the chronograph, the power really hasn't changed that much. So on this particular rifle, the breech seal was obviously doing its job, and we don't have any leaks emanating from this area. We do also have 2 sealing O-rings in the block here, although I can't feel any air when we fire the rifle either leaking out the front of the barrel or from the single shot loader area. I will say you may feel a puff of air from the hammer. As it moves forwards, it obviously displaces some air, and sometimes that can be confused with a breech seal gone or one of these 2 O-rings in the block failing. However, I'm not really worried about that on this rifle, so we can move on to the next step. The next thing we're going to check for is any pellet debris within the hammer chamber. Sometimes, especially when using a single shot loader, the pellet can fall back into the action when the rifle is cocked. And in some cases you'll feel it straight away, the rifle won't cock, or it'll be stiff, or the trigger won't work, something will be off, but then other times the pellet can find its way in front of the hammer, or maybe just get caught up in the spring, and you won't necessarily feel it. Depending on where the pellet is lodged, it can cause you issues with your power as well, so that's the next thing we're going to check. First thing we'll do is remove the trigger cassette using a 2.5mm Allen key, just to remove these 2 bolts here. With that done, we're going to lift the action up and then pull on the trigger, and the trigger cassette should fall free. There we have it. So there is the trigger, and I don't know if you can see it there, but there is a pellet that's just fallen out the action. If we look on the trigger sear as well, we do have a small amount of pellet debris stuck to the oil, so we'll wipe that off very quickly. And we'll just look through everything and make sure everything is nice and clean. So as you can see there, there are a couple of marks where the pellet has been forced against the hammer. That could have been causing us the low power issue on this particular rifle. With that out, what we'll do now is just give a quick look in the hammer housing just to make sure that there's no other pellet debris. The bag rider's in the way, so I have to do this. What I am going to do is just use my airline blower to just blow in the hammer area there, just to make sure that there's no lead shards. Right then, so I'm happy that the hammer area is free of any debris. Taking a closer look at the hammer and the trigger sear here, it does look to be that the actual debris itself was wedged between the hammer and the trigger sear. I've double checked inside the action and there doesn't seem to be any more debris, so I'm quite happy to move forward. If we take a look at the pellet here, you can see that it's been awful mangled up. We have a flad on this side which I think was wedged against the trigger sear. I couldn't feel anything when actually operating the rifle, so I'm hoping that that'll solve our power issue. But there's only one way to find out, so we'll stick the trigger sear back. To do that, all we need to do is slot the trigger sear back into the rifle with this hooked side facing forward. And then we can reinstall the 2 securing screws. With that reinstalled, the next thing I'm going to do is put the rifle back over the chronograph and see if the power has changed. Right then, and with that done, that seems to be the power issue solved. The rifle is now running at 710 feet per second when using JSB heavies, exactly what it was when I set it last. So I'm very happy that the power has been reset. What I will do though is just go through some other areas that you can have a look at if your rifle is running slightly low. So the first thing to double check is that your power wheel is set on max. So obviously it's nice and easy to change the power wheel on this rifle, so just make sure it's set on max, just in case it's been bumped or something like that. Another thing to double check is the weight of the pellet in your chronograph. It's incredibly easy to mis-enter the weight of your chosen pellet into your chronograph, and that can cause you an awful lot of headache when there's absolutely nothing wrong with the rifle. Another common mistake is the pellet probe in the rear of the rifle. So if you've had your pellet probe out at any point, it may be worth double checking that you have it in the right orientation. Now this particular pellet probe is a pin probe, but on the 177 rifles, if you get the pellet probe up the wrong way, it can cause the rifle to be low powered. Generally speaking, when the pellet probe is up the wrong way, the power of the rifle will be around 7 to 9 foot-pounds. So an awful big drop in power. Other things to check is that the barrel is all the way home. If it's forward slightly, the pellet probe, the transfer port within the barrel and the block may be slightly misaligned. So just double check that the barrel is all the way back. Another thing to check is shoot the rifle without a moderator attached. Some moderators can clip, and if the rifle is clipping you may get an inconsistent shot string, or maybe the power will be slightly low as the pellet will be clipping the moderator and slowing down. And the last thing that I would say to check before tearing your rifle apart is your chronograph itself. Some chronographs, when they're low on battery, will read the wrong feet per second. Another thing to check is that you're shooting your rifle nice and straight through the chronograph. If your chronograph is set up flat like so, and you're shooting through it at an angle, the actual feet per second reading can be wrong. So just make sure that you're shooting nice and parallel through your chronograph, and that the actual tilt of the rifle, so the up and down, is as flat as you can get it. Right then, the last thing I want to do before we go on to some more advanced troubleshooting techniques is just mention about the cocking dog. So the cocking dog is this piece in the top of the hammer. What you need to check is that the cocking dog is all the way back against the hammer itself. What can happen is after a bit of use, the cocking dog can get knocked forward slightly, and if it's forward, the cocking dog itself may actually be limiting the travel of the hammer. If it is forward slightly, all you would need to do is use a 2mm Allen key to loosen these two grub screws, push the cocking dog all the way back against the hammer, then tighten the two grub screws up nice and tight. On this particular rifle, the cocking dog is all the way back, but that's another nice easy thing to check. To remove this rear section, all you need to do is remove the 4 securing bolts in the top, the 1 securing grub screw in the side, and then the 2 securing bolts in the side here which hold the trigger cassette on. If you're struggling, we do have a full disassembly video on the BRK Ghost on the YouTube channel, and there is also a full written workshop guide on the BRK website. But that's just another thing to look out for. Right then, with that all said and done, if you've gone through the troubleshooting tips within this video and your rifle is still low powered, there are a couple more areas which I'll briefly go over. So, if your rifle started out fine and has over time lost power, you may have to check the hammer spring and the valve area. So we'll start off with the hammer spring area. After some amount of time, the hammer spring itself can weaken. So after repeated cyclical load, the spring itself can weaken, and that can lower your power. To fix this, all you may need to do is buy a new spring and simply replace it in the back here. I do already have a full disassembly video on the Ghost on the YouTube channel, or there is a full disassembly video on the BRK website. But replacing the hammer spring is a super simple job. and it is another area that can cause you issues. The other area is the valve itself. After some amount of time, the O-rings in the valve can dry out and the valve itself may be sticking. To fix this, all you would need to do is disassemble the valve, clean everything up, put new grease in there, and then rebuild it. Again, there is a full disassembly video on the YouTube channel or on BRK's website. The last thing that I want to mention is that if your rifle has always been low powered, you may have to shim the hammer spring. So hammer spring shims like these two here are nice and easy to make if you have a lathe or maybe a friend that has a lathe. They are 10.25mm OD with a 6.9mm hole through the middle in various thicknesses. So I think this one's 1.2mm, and then this one is probably 1.1 or 1mm. A hammer spring shim just increases the preload on the hammer spring slightly and will get you a little bit more power. I don't sell them unfortunately, as if you were to put a bunch of them all together, you would be able to make the rifle go over the 12-pound limit, so I don't sell the hammer spring shims. But that's another area to be aware of. Right then, with that all said and done, that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video. So thank you very much for watching. I hope it's been useful, and we'll see you in the next one.